We're only 4 weeks in, and half of these teams need to just start over. That's what we're talking about today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is the man who said that headline at the top of the show to me just a minute ago before we started this show, Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. We were kind of talking through another great Sunday in the NFL. And, there's some – it's not all bad, but we were talking about the Bengals, which is a scary situation. We were talking a little bit about Pittsburgh. Certainly, you talk about like that Denver-Chicago game and what those teams are doing. We've talked more than enough about Atlanta and what they're doing. There's a lot of offenses around the NFL that this season hasn't started the way that they had hoped it would. I mean, hopefully they have answers at some point.
Hopefully they will. We do need to start with the two biggest stories of the week, or at least the big story and then the story that maybe is more relevant to me than most people, but still was a pretty cool development. So the biggest story is that you have Josh Allen look absolutely fantastic. The new things that they are doing, or the wrinkles that they have added to their game on offense, really, really look good against the Dolphins. And we know the Dolphins' strength is going to be on the offensive side, but the Bills put so much pressure on this Dolphins team by scoring at will that, they did get them to make some mistakes in that game there. And so you look at what they're doing with James Cook. That worked again today. You look at what they're doing with Stephon Diggs. He has a massive 3-touchdown game. A lot of credit goes to the coaching staff, to Josh Allen, as he, reinvents himself, but continues to try and make these small adjustments. When you watch the games today, and it just, but I don't know. And the Bills did have that game against the Jaguars a couple of years ago when Urban Meyer had the Jaguars as the worst team in football, and yet the Bills did lose that game. But generally speaking, the Bills have not gone through these periods that we've seen from the Bengals, and it certainly reinforces the fact that, it's unfortunate Buffalo hasn't been able to play in one of these Super Bowls. They definitely deserved that over the Bengals. It's impossible for me to understand how the Bengals hammered them in last year's playoffs. But in reaction to that, we see two teams going in very, very different directions. Obviously, there was some offseason rhetoric about Diggs and his fit in the team, getting a little bit older, those types of things. You get Dalton Kincaid. They're running a lot of 2 tight ends. You've talked about that. Everything came together in this game for them to score more or less at will. And you think about what they did here, and in some ways, especially now that we have another game where we've witnessed this Denver defense. Denver was completely and totally incapable of stopping anything that Justin Fields was doing. And you were kind of filling me in before the show on just how down people are on Fields. We'll get to that in a moment. He actually looked really good today, other than obviously making the crucial mistake, which that does count. But, how impressive is this game that the Bills just put together on both sides of the ball? And even though it doesn't stand out quite as much, unless you have Stephon Diggs, in that case, you're just about as excited about this game as Dolphins managers were for everything that they put together last week. But this is even more of a statement game than what we got a week ago from the Dolphins.
Yeah, this was, that's a big statement there. But this was an incredible game. They come out, drive right down the field, and score on each of their first 3 drives. The Dolphins answered on the first 2. So this game, right out of the gate, you had 5 straight touchdowns. It looked like it was going to be 70-70 at some point. The Bills did punt on their 4th drive. The Dolphins had punted on their 3rd and then punt also on their 4th. Bills come back, score a touchdown, a quick one with the long strike to Diggs for the 55-yard TD on their 5th drive, get a field goal on their 6th drive. So, and then they kneeled up the half. They're basically their 6 first half drives. They have 4 touchdowns, a field goal, 1 punt, Come out in the second half, field goal, touchdown, punt, end of game. I mean, basically every single drive. And the explosive plays were there too. I mean, you had the deep touchdown to Diggs. You had a long pass to James Cook on like a wheel route, a 48-yard reception for him. Gabe Davis has a 34-yard catch in this game. Latavius Murray, of all people, rips off a 29-yard run. You would have thought that would have been James Cook, but their offense looked incredible. Absolutely. Josh Allen winds up with a perfect passer rating, 4 touchdowns passing, +1 rushing, 21 of 25, 4 incompletions, 4 passing TDs. Anytime you have the same number of incompletions as passing TDs, you probably had a pretty good game.
And, the big play for Diggs was more rank defensive incompetence, where they managed to commit a pass interference, and then the 2 guys who are wrestling him and each other to make the tackle. I mean, Diggs is not a big man who breaks a lot of tackles, Ben, but he went ahead and just spun around a couple times while these Dolphins defenders were doing whatever they were doing. And then once they both fell down, he ran for the touchdown, which, again, that's good. You do want to stay up. You do want to run for the touchdowns. The strike to Gabe Davis was an impressive play. Yeah, I mean, when you have Josh Allen, he rushes for the TD too. I mean, you can see what they're capable of in the red zone. And even though, when we've talked about the previous red zone performance, probably a little fluky in a negative way, they look like a team that's going to put a lot of balls in the end zone. That part obviously was always the case, but if they score better from in close as well, this team is going to be a juggernaut. Increasingly difficult to understand how they could have lost that first game to the Jets. But, we do know that the Jets, I mean, as we're recording this, the Jets are actually in the midst of a comeback against the Chiefs. The Jets will go through a couple of stretches every once in a while where they play all right.
They have a good defense, and they designed a scheme to frustrate Allen and force him to try to play within himself, and he didn't want to in the opener, and he said it at the end. He kind of forced some things and cost his team, and then since then he's played a lot more controlled, it's felt like, and they've been basically unstoppable every game since then.
Yeah, they look really good. If you have Jalen Waddle, it was vaguely encouraging that he looked a little better here, even though the final stats don't show it. We had a relatively late touchdown pass from Tua to Waddle that was wiped out on a completely unrelated illegal man downfield play where one of the offensive linemen just kind of forgets what's going on. Ben, I mentioned it before. I would love to see those rules eliminated because they just take away from the sport. Raheem Mostert, a couple of fumbles in this one. That won't necessarily help him as he tries to hold off Devin Achane, who looks just absolutely astonishingly good. I've mentioned his name along with Chris Johnson a bunch of times in the offseason, and always semi-seriously, semi-jokingly. Obviously, nobody's going to be Chris Johnson. I don't know. I mean, he looks awfully good. Mostert can't be out there fumbling multiple times in a game. That is not going to get the job done for him. Although he also did make a really good catch, and that's going to be part of the offense as well. He gets 5 targets. Been one of the trends that we've talked about for the Dolphins that was very encouraging. If you're going to, number one, draft Tyreek Hill, who has his first sort of down game here, in part that's because after they got way behind, they went ahead and did rest him. But we have 34 targets here, and there are 5 different players with at least 5 targets, and a couple other guys were actually out for this game too. What's your thought on how this Dolphins offense is going to evolve? Obviously, you're not going to have any concerns about Tyreek Hill, but just how unbelievably dominant he is. But, are there concerns for Waddle and any of the rest of these guys if the offense doesn't end up as concentrated? Or, what's your thought on the concentration here? Is this kind of a 1-week fluke?
It felt pretty fluky to me. I'm not exactly sure what happened. Waddle lost a TD late to ineligible man downfield, as you mentioned. I think we've seen, a larger sample over the last couple of years of how this offense can operate. This was, I think, one game where it was a little bit more difficult. I mean, again, I never really know the X's and O's. I'm always kind of wary when an offense is way out on an edge, doing things a lot differently than other teams that, like, someone will figure them out. I mean, I wrote about this a little bit this offseason with Miami. While being very high on them, having a little bit of concern about the ways that they were able to put up stats being so unique last year, that when we think about it from a range of outcomes perspective, the downside, the poor side of the situation could be that things could go maybe worse on the bad end than, most situations can go. If there's like a specific defensive scheme or a specific way to handle what the Dolphins want to be able to do. It seems like the Bills probably did something. My point is just that I'm always kind of wary of that. And so when they do this, I'm like, oh, our other team's going to be able to pick up a blueprint from the Bills and start using it against the Dolphins. This is one of those first times that we've seen. I mean, Braxton Berrios has 6 targets today, and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both have 5. I mean, you're not going to find a lot of games like that in the Dolphins last year and a half, or whatever you want to say, since the beginning of 2022, since Mike McDaniel took over and Tyreek Hill came over and all of those things. It is a very rare situation there. At the same time, I mean, I think you look at the ways that they use the running backs, and it's clear that they are. I mean, one of the things after last week that we talked about is that they might just have a new layer to what they want to do offensively and be able to add more explosive elements from their running backs, with Achane looking like he is and Mostert obviously already looking good. But how they threw to those guys, they both have 5 targets in this game. As you mentioned, Mostert makes an awesome catch. But Achane, yeah, I mean, he looks really good. He's just very, very explosive. Early in this game, I thought Miami was going to keep right with Buffalo. So I don't know that it's it was a big scheme thing for Buffalo, or maybe they just missed on some plays, or whatever happened. They have a couple turnovers. Tua throws a pick. You mentioned Mostert loses a fumble. But yeah, I mean, right out of the gate from the beginning, they were moving the ball and scoring quickly. So I don't know. I guess I wouldn't consider myself to be particularly concerned about them.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about this offense. And if anything, Tua has pretty vastly underperformed from a fantasy perspective what I think this offense is going to do for him. And so if you have anybody who is frustrated that more of the points haven't gone to him in the early going, I mean, you're going to pay quite a bit, right? I mean, we're not talking about preseason prices, but I think that the in-season prices probably still in many cases will understate what the future is going to be. I just hope that it really does stay pretty concentrated in these 3 stars so we can get the full fantasy bonanza from it. Then the second big storyline this week, and it actually, I think, plays off of this Bills victory, because the fact that the Washington Commanders went on the road and were right there. I feel like Ron Rivera made a mistake at the end of this game, but we're right there to take out what really looks like the 1-2 just fantastically dominant power teams in the NFC a week after being so humbled and humiliated by the Bills. I think that also is another. I mean, we know that it's any given Sunday, right? We know that there are going to be teams like, the Titans last week, Titans this week, some big differences there. We know that individual teams are going to make adjustments. They're going to play better, week to week. You're going to have turnovers that play a big role, but it's hard to overstate just how good the Commanders looked really in all phases against this Philadelphia juggernaut, and not think back to how they were just so completely and totally overmatched a week ago. Again, when we think about how the Bills looked, but you look at this game and Sam Howell needing to play well, because I mean, he'd come out and he had played well the first 2 weeks, but when you are a late round pick as opposed to a top 10 pick, I mean, a top 10 pick who plays the game like he played last week is going to be fine, right? The team gives him a long leash. You have a chance to go out and prove what you can do. No big deal. You get drafted where Sam Howell was drafted, and you play a game like last week, and already people are writing about, how soon is it until we see the other guy? I mean, he needed to come out and play well for his career, and also, to get the Commanders going here. I mean, they should have. They could have very easily won this game. And even to
why
overtime,
didn't they? You're talking about they should have went for 2 at
they
the
should have
end of
gone for 2.
regulation. Yeah.
They should have gone for 2.
Why did they not? I mean, on the road in Philadelphia, this is the exact situation that coaches talk about. Look, you're on the road. You are an underdog. It's a 50-50 play. The odds typically say on 2-point conversions. You're not a 50-50 competitor probably in overtime against the Philadelphia Eagles, who were in the Super Bowl last year. And you're coming off, an uplifting drive that ends in a touchdown on the last play of regulation. I'm right there.
I mean, the momentum was so dramatically in their favor. It was, I mean, I've got questions about Eric Bieniemy. I think most people do. And yet that final play, and it was a huge play for Jahan Dotson, who had, I mean, the Commanders were excellent in this game, but Dotson was terrible. They maybe win this game if he doesn't drop an easy 3rd down conversion a little bit earlier, because obviously then instead of punting, maybe you go down and score and you're not in that same situation. Now, I mean, the game would have been different from that point. And yet, I mean, he had made some big mistakes. He has 9 targets in this game, only catches 4 for 27, but when you get the touchdown, a lot of that is wiped away. I mean, they had all the momentum. You talk about how they're not as good. It's also something when you think about the very specific dynamics of the way overtime works, where if you score that touchdown to start overtime, it's done. If you kick a field goal, it keeps going. I mean, the Commanders had been blow for blow with the Eagles in this game, but we know that they're not as good. And as you mentioned, they're on the road. Also, I would say that the biggest area where these teams are going to be different is going to be in red zone offense. And when you're thinking about the dynamics of overtime, if your opponent is much more likely to actually punch in the touchdown, I mean, you've got to go for 2 right there, right? I mean, you practiced in training camp, you practiced the last several weeks, you set up as you were getting ready for this game to where if there is a 2-point conversion that we have to make, this is the play that we can go to and we feel really good about it. You have to pull that play out and execute it in that moment.
One play in this game, Sean, I want to mention in contrast to your comments on Stephon Diggs' long touchdown, where he kind of did some spins and the defenders weren't really trying, and then he gets all this yak and runs for a long TD. A.J. Brown's a long touchdown. He catches it in space, and it just runs through a couple arm tackles, cuts back on a bunch of guys. One of the best run after catch plays you'll see. As you were talking about the Diggs play, I was thinking about the A.J. Brown long touchdown. All I wrote in my notes was just, GAM TD, grown-ass man TD. I mean, A.J. Brown is obviously an incredibly fun player and someone that we love around here. That was a great indication of why he's been able to be so successful for so long. We've talked about this before, how he has the ability to create yards after the catch, even with a high 8 on downfield plays, which is something that so few players do. And that was a great example of it, where there's not a lot of receivers that can run like Adrian Peterson through the secondary after the catch and break a bunch of tackles and create all the yards and then take it to the house at the end. That was a fantastic play.
It was also another display of defensive aptitude where you're watching and you're like, these guys are all taking the wrong angles and they're going to all get themselves blocked by his teammates who were doing a good job of getting down there with him. But no, I mean, it was a nice run. He had a fantastic game.
Why won't any of you take the right angle and tackle him? That's what you were thinking in your head.
Well, I mean, Ben, we do have a main event team where we are going for the Amon-Ra and Garrett Wilson double. We weren't able to get that, but we did get A.J. Brown, which right now is, I mean, after this game is looking half decent. Not the only touchdown. He also gets the touchdown to put them up late in the fourth. Devontae Smith, a very distant second in this game, but does make a really impressive 37-yard reception where you have all of these guys who, I mean, they test and that they have the peripherals and all of that. And yet, I mean, how many times do you actually see a wide receiver use their 35 to 40 inch vertical? Devontae Smith is a little dude, but on that 37-yard reception, I mean, he was a good 3 feet in the air. It was one of the best rise up. And it was kind of funny because the commentators and like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about high pointing the ball. I mean, the funny part is he does put both of the hands up and then it kind of just clanks off of them. And then, as people are falling to the ground, he manages to, catch it again, which is great. I mean, you do want to stay in there with it, but to rise up, to get his hands on the ball first, not let it be knocked away. And we had a Quentin Johnston deep shot today where he was in the perfect spot, jumps and lets the defender get the hands in. When you have Devontae Smith and go up and make that play again, I mean, you just have a fantastic team here with the Eagles. DeAndre Swift looks good again. He actually gets in the end zone this week, scores a touchdown. I mean, he's gotten in before, but he's also been tackled at the one a bunch. We didn't have a ton of these short Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns today, which was a little bit of a relief in its own way. Also a situation, I think, if you have Brown, if you have Smith, if you have DeAndre Swift, you love the fact that this offense was actually very concentrated. Dallas Goedert, another game in which he's not involved. DeAndre Swift gets the 4 targets in addition to what he does as a rusher. I mean, there are some plays in there where Kenneth Gainwell, is involved a little bit, but it's a 14-4 edge. I mean, this is how you want the Eagles to look, and they execute. They come from behind. For the Commanders to be in there, Terry McLaurin doesn't do anything that really pops out in this game. But, he battles the whole way through, including, this is a game where Brian Robinson scores a touchdown on a very nice run, but also fumbles at like the 1-inch line. And, Brian Robinson could have easily had 2, but they're in this game in part because Terry McLaurin fights through and recovers a ball in the end zone, right? He looked good. Logan Thomas, even though not hugely involved, he looked good. He took another massive shot to the face in this game. We get some De'Ami Brown action. Sam Howell loves him. Great to see Howell bounce back. We would have loved to see them take the victory there. But in a game that wasn't...
Sean, you mentioned, a couple things. Gainwell gets the 2-point conversion, a little bit tilting there, just from the perspective of, like, they just really like Gainwell more than they should. And so they give him this cheap little goal line touch, could be indicative of future usage. I don't know. The other thing, you were talking about Devonta Smith. That was not his great catch, was not the highlight of his day. The highlight of his day was in the post-game locker room. This is from Eagles beat reporter Jimmy Kempski. Devonta Smith on Jake Elliott. Chicken Little, nothing he can't do. Reporter, Chicken Little? Devonta. Yeah, that's what I call him. Reporter, why? Devonta, you seen Chicken Little? That's what he looks like. Jake Elliott on this nickname. Not a fan. That was one of my favorite things that I saw today.
Jake Elliott did have a nice game, and we had one of our kickers, Ben, lined up for a 66-yard field goal today, and I was very excited about that, but then they committed an offside, so we didn't get to see it. A game played by two teams that were not as good as the Eagles and Commanders, but is still relevant for fantasy, and given some of the other games that took place, was actually exciting. Denver Broncos, Chicago Bears, they can move the ball when they're playing each other.
Yeah, they were able to score. That was I was telling you before, I thought about taking the over in this game because of how bad the defenses are, but then I decided it was too much faith in these offenses, and I'm not really regretting that, even though it clearly went over. I think that was the right decision. You never really know how these things are going to go. The Broncos didn't look good early. The Bears definitely didn't look good late. Yeah, I don't have like major takeaways from this game, Sean. What did you pull from it? I feel like this is not going to be indicative of what these teams are. I think this is one of the better offensive performances we'll see from both teams.
Well, it's certainly going to be that, but it does give you more optimism about some of their pieces because as bad as these two defenses are, they still are NFL teams, right? And so you look at what Justin Fields did in this game where he throws for 4 touchdowns. He throws for well over 300 yards. He averages almost 10 yards per attempt. Then there was a point in this game where he was 24 for 26. And of those 2 incompletions, one was the Hail Mary at the end of the first half, right? And so, yeah, we did see last week again that maybe the Denver Broncos are historically bad on defense. It's been pretty striking just how quickly their elite defense from not that long ago has deteriorated into one of the worst units in the league. Sean Payton obviously getting a little bit of a lesson in humility after he made fun of some other coaches in the offseason. But the Denver Broncos are starting some NFL players. And Justin Fields looked about as good through the vast majority of this game as he's looked bad the rest of the season. And we have to think back to where we were at this point last year, where, Justin Fields was very droppable in fantasy after a month, and then he ends up as one of the highest scoring quarterbacks in all of football. That player isn't just gone. And so when you see some of the passes, and some of the passes today were highlight material. He was throwing sidearm missiles into tight windows, right? Now, again, I'm not saying that that's going to continue the rest of the season, but when you think about all of the rhetoric coming out of Chicago this last week and the fact that they reacted in a positive way, I think that that's interesting. And DJ Moore, we got to see what the offseason thesis was. You and I weren't really on him, but we love DJ Moore. Even with your negativism this offseason, I still consider you to be maybe DJ Moore's premier defender in all of fantasy football. He was fantastic today, 131-1. Cole Kmet, somebody that, anytime that he's like 2 rounds below ADP, which would happen all the time for whatever reason, you're like, I'm going to pull the trigger here. The 2 touchdowns, he looked good. Khalil Herbert was fantastic in both the receiving game where he scores a touchdown, he rushes for over 100 yards. They've got pieces in this offense. And one of the things is that I think most teams would tell you, even though the Steelers didn't actually respond by putting together their own juggernaut, that if you get rid of Chase Claypool, that is going to help you. He was inactive today. And so they take a step forward. On the other side of the ball, the thing that I think was the most disturbing, and we did a big show, which I enjoyed quite a bit. I encourage people, if they do have interest, to check it out from last week, kind of looking through the situation with different backfields early in this game, a real dagger, a very frustrating, sad moment where Javonte Williams goes down. Seeing the way that he went down and hearing that it was a hip, I thought he was done for the season. The reports right now are that it's not actually a big deal and he's going to be fine. So
yeah, he's the report was that it's just a hip flexor and he is not expected to miss much, if any, time, I believe was the exact quote.
So that's good. The flip side of it is that Lil McLaughlin, the preseason reports on him, you could see them in this game. Again, you're playing the Chicago Bears, so it's not like a true NFL defense, but you could see the explosiveness. You could see the comfort he had as both a runner and a receiver.
Sean, these small school guys, you've said for a really long time, we're looking for the guys that are incredibly productive. Why is it these guys don't get drafted? McLaughlin was the NCAA record breaker for career rushing yardage at Youngstown State. I think he played for a couple different schools, if I remember right. Ends up breaking the all-time NCAA record. Wildly productive throughout college, even though he's playing at a very low level. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to draft him. He latches on as a UDFA and looks like he's very much capable of playing running back in the NFL.
Yeah, you think about Austin Eckler when you're seeing some of the things that he's doing in the early stages here. I mentioned on our show last week that the guy that I really like is Keaton Mitchell. It was interesting when I was going back through and putting together the Zero RB Universe article at the end of last week and was noting some of the FFPC waiver wire pickups. We have the FFPC waiver app on the site if anybody is interested in kind of seeing how those things transpire every week to give you a sense of, how you might want to bid in your own leagues. He was actually the number 2 guy behind Melvin Gordon. Obviously, not that long after that, you find out that Gus Edwards and Justice Hill are both going to be okay. And so I'm sure that Gordon dropped back to the waiver wire. But these guys who, I think that size is the other thing, right? And so if a player is playing at a smaller school and isn't a big dude, but certainly some of the things that we're witnessing with 2023 in particular, it's like you got to have the speed to make something of the plays when you. But
this was true even back with Danny Woodhead was one of the first names on this type of list. But he was smaller. Eckler is obviously strong, but smaller in stature, I guess. Philip Lindsay's another name that comes to mind. Not it.
Well, Tariq Cohen,
As a
he
UDFA.
doesn't have the injury types of things. Again, guys who small drafted either late or not at all. There are interesting players there. Jerry Jeudy looked pretty decent in this game. Marvin Mims has another 48-yard reception. I mean, how many 40-plus yard receptions does Marvin Mims have to have, Ben, before he's the focal point of this offense? Cortland Sutton does absolutely nothing in this game. He does score a touchdown, so he bails out his fantasy managers there. I mean, obviously, we have some other guys who are playing pretty well, and we're going to have that Seahawks game tomorrow night. I'm still very excited for JSN for probably not like the short term, but the intermediate and the long term. Nobody's doing anything like Puka, but I mean, Marvin Mims with Puka, thinking about some guys who weren't the top players drafted. And we had, Michael Wilson, a weird sort of splash game today as they're playing the 49ers. I mean, could Marvin Mims be the best guy in this group, and or could he be someone who's a starter for the Denver Broncos who need all the help they can get?
Yes. I mean, I think clearly it's very similar to the McLaughlin point, very clearly an NFL player and ready to be a contributor right now. They're just not playing him. There was some optimism, I would say, in the fantasy community about him playing more this week. There was some discussions from beat reporters that they were going to shake some things up. From what I saw, I have not got a chance to review the full snap counts and those things, but from what I saw on the in-game reports, no, he caught the 48-yard catch late in the game, so he was out there late. But I know at points throughout the game, he had not really played much again. Like, we were well into the game, and I think I saw at one point it was like 11 snaps, and it's been like 15, 16, 17 snaps. And it was like the third quarter, I want to say, and he had only played 11 snaps. And so it wasn't like he was on pace to really ratchet up. I don't know what those final numbers are going to be. But like you said, he rips off their biggest play of the day. Again here, 48-yard reception. He has essentially all of their top plays so far this year. I think the way you put it is he like ready to be the best of this group. I think potentially what we would love to see is that he would play more than he's playing, right? Like run some more routes and actually get out there. And he's clearly able to win downfield, which was the big thing in his profile. We knew that he had that ability, and he's been able to do it even as a rotational player so far. Can he do a lot more than that? We don't really know because they won't do anything else with him right now.
Yeah, and they're giving him some manufactured touches underneath. They're using him in special teams. They're throwing the ball deep to him. For him to be a big impact player, that intermediate area of the field, the true wide receiver routes, I mean, he's got to be able to take some of those. Jerry Jeudy did look good today in spurts, and he's been used down the field. I think you have to like that. The 5 targets in this game is a little bit weird. I mean, one of the things is Russell Wilson only ends up throwing 28 passes. So there wasn't a lot of volume to go around to the various Broncos receivers that we want to see.
48 total plays for the Broncos in this game.
Yeah, they did not. They didn't deserve to win this game. Obviously, they get a fumble 6 late to help that out. And then on the final drive, I don't know. I mean, you either have to have a better play. So, Ben, we talk about some of these late game situations. We talked about the situation with the Commanders and them not going for 2. The Bears have a 4th and short where you can kick a field goal and go up on a bad NFL opponent. Now, you're obviously not trusting your own defense, so that's still a little bit of an issue. But you can do that, or you can run a 4th down play that makes sense. I don't think that you can hand off on 4th and short to a running back out of the shotgun in that situation, right? I mean, you've got to have better tactics on both the global and the micro levels there.
Yeah, that isn't ideal. We continue to see some bizarre decision-making from NFL teams around the league, frankly, on short yardage plays. You mentioned a minute ago how good the Eagles are at that. You'd think that some of these other teams would want to do similar, but
Ben, I saw a lot of teams run that play this week and get stuffed. So they're like, it's really just Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offensive line that makes it look so easy.
Well,
Mac Jones, that was like one of his last plays in the game it intermixed with all of the terrible interceptions. They do try and run that play. He gets stopped not that long after we get some Bailey.
Speaking of someone getting stopped, Sean, I want to talk to you about the Bengals because they got stopped over and over again, and they look terrible. I have been mostly thinking it is probably just Burrow's calf to blame. I didn't really. I'm sick right now, so I haven't. I didn't pay attention to all the games very closely today, and I tried to watch all the games at once. We had the NFL's fantastic scheduling again this week, where we had 9 games in the early window and 3 in the afternoon late window.
We also had one before people get up.
Yeah, also one, for us West Coasters at 6:30 a.m. They are fantastic the way that they do these things, but especially the 9-3 thing. I understand the London thing and the money involved and all that, but the 9-3
thing is really pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. The 9-3 thing is ridiculous. Like, just I don't even know who it could possibly help. It's just ridiculous. Like, the only people it helps are people who don't really want to watch that much NFL. And they're like, oh, I can track 9 games at once in the morning and then go to the Home Depot in the afternoon. There's only 3 games on. I don't have to worry about watching NFL anymore. Like, that's the only thing I can think. Like, why wouldn't you do 6-6 every week? But I mean, even 8-4 is okay. But like, anyone else, you should be trying to keep them in front of the TV watching as many games as possible. Why do you make it so small? I mean, I know it's a TV contract, so they want the spotlight on those afternoon games. Anyway, I digress. I didn't get to watch the morning games as closely, or I wasn't as focused. I'm hopped up on Dayquil and all that stuff. I have COVID right now. It's great.
Because
Sean,
podcasting through.
I'm podcasting through it. Yes, it's my flu game today. I'm making a ton of sense. But I really wanted to ask you what the hell is going on with the Bengals. So tell me what's going on with the Bengals. You're supposed to come out
and have one of these epic hero-like performances when you're under the weather. You have your very best game.
Well, I mean, I can't fake. And our job
Michael Jordan
requires brain cells.
So the question that I think this game raises, number one, is this is a Titans team that couldn't get first downs last week against the Cleveland Browns, and a Browns team that turns around and gets humiliated by the Baltimore Ravens. One of the issues that we have, and one of the things that was pretty frustrating, I believe, for the Washington Commanders is that one of their players recently was fined more for arguably a clean hit on a QB than the ejection-worthy hit was fined on Logan Thomas. The NFL is not doing a good job of being consistent with these. And yet you can understand why all of those penalties exist when you have games like we have with the Cleveland Browns today, where your backup is in, you can't do anything at all. It just completely ruins the value of the game. So you understand that. But again, this is a situation where the contrast with the previous week also comes into play here, because we know that this Tennessee Titans team is not a good team. They're not particularly good on defense. Their passing defense is terrible, right? And they're not good on offense. And yet their terrible passing defense completely shut down Joe Burrow today. And their offense that couldn't pick up first downs was running all kinds of hilarious plays where Nick Westbrook-Akine is making them look silly. They're throwing flea flickers where there'd be more points on the board for the Titans if DeAndre Hopkins had just been willing to finish his route and put his arms out and catch this beautifully thrown flea flicker to him in the first half.
My take on that was, I mean, I saw some good stuff from Tennessee. They have struggled the first few games this season. Derrick Henry started slow in this one, but then he had one of his sort of vintage TD runs where he looks untackleable. The flea flicker is like one of their trademark shot plays. They've always done that kind of stuff off the run game once they start getting that going. And even though that didn't go for a TD, I felt like we started to see, I mean, they're always going to be a tough offense for fantasy, but we started to see like signs that they're not dust and maybe they're progressing.
Well, one of the things here, Ben, that I think is a complete and total dagger is that this is a little bit like the Chase Claypool thing, a different dynamic, and that I don't think it's, personality and whatnot, but they go ahead and they have Treylon Burks out of the equation, and suddenly the offense works very nicely. But you have Derrick Henry throwing a touchdown pass. I mean, they lined up for this play, and you could see what was coming. And the Bengals called timeout. And so then for the Titans, the question is, do you now change the play because you forced them to burn a timeout? Or do you just line up and run the same play that like everybody knows you're going to run?
Which teams never do. They never line up and run the same play because when you show a trick formation and you motion your quarterback out wide, and then the defense calls a timeout, they're going to talk through how to handle that situation. You always see the offense change it. So when they came back out and were in the same formation, I was like, oh, they're just going to do the same thing. Like the Bengals are going to be ready for this.
The Bengals were not ready. Derrick Henry throws a touchdown pass. Yeah, this was humiliation from top to bottom. You did finally get a decent play from DeAndre Hopkins. He has a 38-yard catch where he does do some of the work there. I think that, again, if you're a Tennessee fan, you've got to have a little bit of enthusiasm for that because, I mean, DeAndre Hopkins has looked completely washed. And so for him making a play, that was good. But the other thing that was, interesting here, because I think that a lot of people are going to be like, maybe Derrick Henry is no longer, one of the top 2 running backs in the NFL. Maybe the offense has a lot of trouble blocking. One of the things that I wrote about last week in the Zero RB universe is that the Titans run block numbers you can get in our advanced team stats tool powered by Sports Info Solutions. They were atrocious through the first 3 weeks. And you're like, well, maybe some of that is just that like the Cleveland Browns are blowing everybody up. They're making it tough to do some of these things. Then you go back and look at 2022 and 2021 and the run block numbers for them are terrible. And so then you're like, well, Derrick Henry actually is still doing some pretty impressive stuff. It's no longer the Arthur Smith version of this offense, which is kind of hard to believe that would be a good thing. But Henry looks good. The question that I think a lot of people would have...
The man can design a rushing attack, Sean. We know he can design a rushing attack.
I don't know. You got to score more than like the occasional touchdown. Tyjae Spears played a lot again in week 3, which, people are going to potentially have some trouble with. He comes out in week 4. I don't think that he played as much in this game, but when he did play, he looked good. His 5 carries go for 40 yards, and they were the highlight variety. His 4 targets, he catches 3 of them, only the 18 yards, but one of them was a circus catch where he sticks his hand out on a ball that was just going to zing by him and was not on target. And perhaps he wasn't in the right spot, but either way, sticks his hand out, is able to knock it to himself, pull that ball in. He looks really, really
He's
good.
already really good. Yeah.
That's a little bit of an issue potentially for Henry going forward. You don't want to have an elite backup, really. But for the Titans and for Titans fans and certainly for fantasy managers,
Sean,
that part is cool.
Yeah. You were saying they weren't using him a lot. They were using him like on the first drive, like early. That was another thing that I noted. He caught his first pass on the second play from scrimmage. The first play was a Derrick Henry run. Then he catches a pass, Spears. Then 2 more Derrick Henry runs, then a Spears run on the 5th play. And, later in the drive, he caught another pass on that first drive. Derrick Henry has never had it.
Sure. And
Derrick Henry's never had a secondary back. Yeah.
They played together last week. They played together this week. You get a 22-5
they're on the field together. Yeah. But Derrick Henry's never had a secondary back on his offense that would take 3 touches in the first drive of a game.
Never. And he's never had a backup where if he got hurt, you're like, this guy is going to be a league winner.
Yeah.
Hopefully Henry doesn't get hurt. Obviously, plenty of our guys have gotten hurt so far. If he does, it's still problematic that what the Tennessee Titans did on offense in this game is probably not something they're going to be able to do in many games because the Bengals defense looks just as bad as the Bengals offense, but it's very encouraging. And you think about what the Titans do through 3 weeks, and I mean, Ryan Tannehill, definitely one of those guys who has zero fantasy value, even really in Superflex, getting down to having zero fantasy value. He made some big time throws in this game. Yeah, you gotta give these guys a chance to play enough. Now, I mean, we know that he's not going to emerge as a star again or anything like that, but in terms of being completely dusted, I mean, this was a big bounce back game for him. And the funny thing then too is that the AFC South is bad. It's bad. I mean, even the Jaguars, who, there was reason for some enthusiasm, they have not looked good. And for the Titans to be back to 2-2, they've got a shot at this.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, the other team you'd have to give some credit to and be excited about is the Texans. Well, and I mean, I think you can give a little bit of excitement for the Colts too. It is a bad division, but the bottom team, I thought the Colts and the Texans didn't have a shot. I thought it was the Jaguars division unless the Titans could win the division. I think it's pretty wide open now. The Bengals, Sean, we spent that whole time talking about the Titans.
Because the Bengals, there's nothing. I mean, T. Higgins.
Before the show, you said, and I'm going to pin you down on this, how serious you were about this. You said you're maybe more, because I was like, I mean, this has got to be Burrow's calf. We can't be this freaked out about the Bengals. They were incredible last year. They went all, playoff run. They went more pass heavy last year, second in the NFL and pass rate over expected, and their offense looked great. Burrow had tremendous numbers. The year prior, they made the playoff run as well and were really good late that season. Jamar Chase's rookie season, early that year, they were a little too run heavy. But for a year and a half, looked incredible. And you said you were almost ready to throw out the 2 playoff runs rather than throw out these first 4 games of this year. How serious are you about that statement?
I'm serious, right? And especially for 2023, because at a certain point, the fact that you've seen a specific team do it in the past doesn't mean that you should take the evidence from that team from this year and ignore it. And so when we see how poorly Burrow is playing, and it's an issue when you have multiple things that I think don't dovetail well. So you have the calf injury, right? That is going to make it harder for someone who already has not great arm strength. Now, not great arm strength doesn't mean a bad quarterback, because Tua has some of the weakest arm strength of any player in the NFL. And so when Tyreek Hill comes out a couple years ago and says he throws a better, more accurate deep ball than Patrick Mahomes, the first thing that you do is just laugh, because that seems silly on the face of it. Well, there still are some potential issues, right? But you can be a weak-armed quarterback. I mean, you think about Peyton Manning when he went off for the Denver Broncos. I mean, he has a weak arm at that point. Kurt Warner had some seasons where he was past his peak, does really well with a weak arm. Certainly you have something like Phillip Rivers in probably the full second half of his career, a pretty weak arm. You can get that done, but you don't necessarily want to have a weak arm and then have the calf injury, which is going to sap some of those things further. But you also don't want to have it in an environment where you're limited to a certain style of play because your team isn't pass protecting well, and you've got to get the ball out instantly. There are so many things that you can't do when you have a quick time to throw. And so when we look at these things and we say, oh, a quick time to throw is good, it's like, it's good and bad depending on the context. And there are going to be situations where having a much longer time to throw is going to be very helpful. One of the things that Patrick Mahomes does, for example, is extend these plays. We know that the scrambling quarterbacks, one of the reasons why their receivers in many cases get better separation when you look at the separation scores, is that, once you've been running around for 5 minutes and the quarterback actually unleashes it when a guy is wide open, then you're going to be more open. When you've got to throw the ball right as you finish your drop, you're not letting Jamar Chase win in the ways that he could otherwise win. I mean, this is another game here where he catches 7 passes but only goes for 73 yards. And you watch how they're playing here. He would have to do something really special for it to be any different, because they're not setting these plays up to where he could get behind the defense. They're not setting these plays up to where he's got that much chance to do like a Devontae Smith catch. We talked about that one, to do a play like we got from an A.J. Brown. And when you're doing that, and then Tyler Boyd looks done. He didn't make plays in this game. T. Higgins, at a certain point, we love T. Higgins. We've got a lot of T. Higgins. That's not working out right now. I'm trying to consider like what his value should legitimately be in Dynasty, because you've got a young guy who's been very dynamic in the past. And yet one of the things that we witnessed again today is that he's not elite when the ball hits his hands. And it's not a huge problem, right? If you're getting wide open all the time, but he's not a great catch point guy. He's not extremely fast. He does rely on the route running and the physicality and the fact that he's playing off of Jamar Chase and that he's got an elite quarterback. Well, if a lot of those things aren't actually in place and he's always hurt, I mean, the problem here is that a lot of these injuries are going to be fluky, but with Higgins, they definitely added up to where now there have been so many different instances in which he's not on the field for you as a fantasy player, but he's also not on the field for the Bengals. And even when you're the Bengals, even when you're Joe Burrow, when you have these other problems, Jamar Chase isn't enough, right? So we work through all of that, and you get back to the end of this, and the person who ties Jamar Chase for the longest gain in this game is a Trenton Irwin. You know, you have the 14 low value carries to a Joe Mixon. One of the things that has been frustrating, I'm sure for them, also for fantasy managers, they don't have someone emerging behind him. We got that Chris Evans puff stuff at the end of training camp again this year. That was a complete and total mirage again. Travion Williams gets one carry in this game. Chase Brown gets one target, which he does catch and lose yards on. You need some other pieces to emerge here to round out a team that, I mean, it really felt like had so much firepower that even when they hit hurdles, they'd eventually be able to overcome them. The fact that they've overcome these hurdles in the past doesn't necessarily indicate that they will be able to overcome them in the future, even though we have plenty of reason to believe that individual parts of this team are above average. I mean, they're 1-3. One of the other problems that they have for 2023 is they're probably not that far away from actually pointing to 2024, even though we're just 4 weeks in.
That's a bleak outlook. I don't buy it yet, but I said to you before the show, I admire the quickness with which you're willing to face reality on some of these things, because I think I tend to cling to my priors too long in some of these cases. It's a tough division, although the Browns haven't played well and the Steelers haven't played well. So other than the Ravens, maybe it isn't that tough of a division. It was preseason. It was a division, I think, where all four teams had win total over-unders that indicated they would be better than 500 or something like that. And there was talk of, could all four teams in this division be better than 500 in the same season? How when does that ever happen before this, that, and the other thing? I don't think that's actually going to happen in this division this year. I still think it's got to be the calf. And I think my counter is just that we've seen Joe Burrow play at a really high level. He's a good processor. He's incredibly accurate. He's like the premier accuracy quarterback in the NFL. I've thought of him and I know I've in some of my writing compared him to Drew Brees a lot over the last couple of years, where Brees throughout his whole career was so accurate at all depths and, broke the accuracy record, completion percentage record, set it, and then broke his own record, several times for the highest percentage of completions in a season. A lot of that was because they would do a lot of short passing and things like that. But he was always so good at delivering the ball on time and in a position to give his players the opportunity to run with it. Burrow has shown those types of traits. Very accurate at all depths. Very accurate to all of his running backs. Through his 4 seasons, you go look at the different running backs. It's not just like Mixon. It's Mixon. It's when Pirine was there. It's all the different guys have had strong catch rates and some of those things. And I do think a big percentage of that falls back onto Burrow and onto him getting the ball out in a timely manner, and then obviously accurate and throwing a catchable dump off pass, whatever. Which isn't the only point, but I do think there's a feel to it with the running back stuff that I guess I'm trying to emphasize, where some of these other quarterbacks are like really late or they don't time it well, and then there's traffic and it's harder to like complete these short passes. It's just like he understands how to get the ball to his players in space so they can actually catch it and do something with it. And it's not just the running backs, like I said. It's the Trent Irwins of the world who has been very efficient on a per target basis while he's played with Joe Burrow. I don't think that's because Trent Irwin's good. I think that's because Joe Burrow's good. Yeah, I mean, it's been 4 really bad games though. And so, the things that you're pointing out are certainly massive concerns. As you were kind of talking about that, I went over their Pro Football Reference page just to get the context of their 4 games. I mean, 142 total yards in week 1. They get to 282 the next week, 309 the week after that. But I mean, 3 points, 24 points, and 19 points. And then back to 3 points today. And what was it? 211 total yards. I mean, their season high is 309 total yards right now. They've scored 3 points in 2 different games. They've had, their 1 win, they only scored 19. It hasn't been great. They scored 24 in 1 game and against the Ravens. That's their season high, and they had a pick 6 in that game. I mean, offensively, they scored 17 points in that game. So, they had a punt return TD early in that game is what it was. But wasn't their offense that got them to 24. Their offense has not scored more than 20 points in any of their 4 games yet. I'm hoping that you're wrong, but you've got me concerned that there might be something that I'm a little bit too hopeful.
And I mean, it's not like Joe Burrow is going to suddenly be a bad quarterback, or that Jamar Chase is not going to be one of the best receivers in the NFL. And especially if you're reloading in Dynasty, almost anything you can do to get him on your roster, you would want to do. But you think back even to some of the stats that were weird with Chase coming into the season, where he doesn't grade as well in separation as you might think for someone of his caliber, doesn't necessarily catch the ball that well, does the extreme numbers in yards after the catch, and we would expect those to continue. But I mean, also, when you have someone of his athleticism, because Jamar Chase is one of these guys with the crazy athletic peripherals, and I mean, we just know how good he's been from some of the things he's done. You have got to get him the ball in space better. And when I say in space, I just mean you got to get him open more easily in these games. The Bengals apparently have accomplished some of the things they've accomplished the last 2 years in spite of coaching as opposed to because of it. And I say that because we've had so many starts to the seasons where they look unprepared. And so when you think about them going to the Super Bowl, when you think about them with the upset with the Bills last year, I mean, that creates a ton of insulation for the coaching staff. That almost might be bad for Cincinnati, where it's hard to imagine a team coached by an Andy Reid, for example, and having them look this bad in so many different stretches when you know the talent that they have. We also know that they've gotten a lot of credit for some of the ways they put together their defense in the past and that type of thing, where it kind of looks like that was fluky, as opposed to those were decisions that allowed them to be really dominant on defense. This is not a Bengals team that has a difference-making defense. You don't necessarily need that. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs haven't had it for the most part. They've looked better early on in the season. But at a certain point, I mean, you really want to see your front office, your offensive coaches, your defensive coaches. You want to think that there is some element to your team that is good beyond just Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. And we're just really not seeing that with the way this current Bengals squad is put together.
Yeah, one of the guys that came to mind as you were talking through their defense, I mean, Lou Anarumo got a lot of credit. Jesse Bates is a guy that signed with the Falcons this offseason, maybe was more of a part of some of the things that have worked for them defensively in the past than he's maybe been given credit for. I know he's been getting a lot of praise for his first few games with the Falcons. So yeah, maybe it's just one of those things where it wasn't scheme, it was some of the personnel that, isn't the same or what have you. Yeah, man, that's a bummer. We'll track the Bengals. I'm basically just going to pretend like everything you said isn't true and be like a little kid who acts like the monster under the bed's not real. And then next week, I'm going to pick the Bengals to win again. All right. Sounds good.
I hope that it works that way. Are you concerned at all about T. Higgins and the trajectory that we have going on here?
Yeah, no, all of this stuff is wildly concerning, which is why when I hear that you're actually legitimately concerned, then like I'd want to hear more about that. Like nothing has been good. There's nothing to be like, I can't point at anything that's like, oh, that's promising. Week 3, the one thing I could point out was, oh, they finally got Jamar Chase involved, 15 targets, whatever, low ADOT, but like Burrow's got to get it out. They got him it was 12 catches on 15 targets in week 3. Used him to move the chains, and I was like, you know what, this is good. This is a positive. Tennessee's got a really good rush defense. 444's Connor Allen had a good tweet this week about how the Titans had been giving up the highest completion percentage in the 0 to 10 yard depth range or something like that. A lot of these short area. So I was like, this is actually a great matchup for what the Bengals need to do right now. They can get it to Chase in these areas of the field. Chase, another guy, very good after the catch. So explosive, but also low-key physical with the ball in his hands as well.
I mean, he and Debo are the two premier after the catch guys.
And A.J. Brown. You got to put him in that class.
Oh, sure, A.J. Brown. I mean, the guy who looks like he's carrying a piano. How could I have forgotten?
You want to put Devonta Smith in the premier after the catch guys. The guy who looks like he's 150 pounds soaking wet. Yeah, probably him. Anyway, Jamar Chase, I thought was going to have a great game in this spot. Catch all these, short area passes and then create after the catch because he's.
I thought T. Higgins was going to carry our Chasing Stolen Bananas team to a huge victory. And instead, we're going to have to rely on the 50 points from Christian McCaffrey.
So that's the other thing we could talk about. But we've talked a lot about McCaffrey. You mentioned, I think at one point in our last week of shows, you had him ranked 3rd overall in tight end premium for FFPC in your rankings. You had, I believe, Kelsey 2nd, and you had McCaffrey ahead of Chase. And you mentioned that, and I think you said something like that looks like that might be too low. And I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, I mean, he looks incredible, but also that maybe it's hard to say that vis-a-vis what Tyreek Hill has done, vis-a-vis what Puka Nacua has done in the role that Cooper Kupp would have had, is sort of the way that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are people who are very frustrated that they took Cooper Kupp in the first 6 picks, and I would be too. I mean, and I am for the shares where I have him, but you look at what Puka has done, and you're like, I mean, Cooper Kupp would be averaging like 25 points a game.
Yeah, the process was there. I mean, the role. I mean, one of the things we said about A.J. Brown at the 1-2 turn was not that A.J. Brown's bad at football, but was that we talked about him, and I remember I used this analogy that like you can't hit a home run with that pick, but he's a triple. He's a guaranteed triple, and he played. What he showed you today is he's a very good football player. He's going to have games like that, but the role isn't.
He's offended by your triple analogy because, I mean, A.J. Brown, even with the piano, is not a triple. Come on.
Well, I mean, a triple in terms of relative to his ADP. Hitting a home run at that ADP draft slot in a full season perspective. Yes, he's a home run hitter on the football field and makes all these big plays. But he
You're just
is
still
a triple.
mad because in week 1, he did not get you guys the 5 pick. I don't know how you say it, but I mean, you guys were like A.J. Brown hitting
Underdog pick him. Yeah.
Going for $10,000 or something like that.
No, it wasn't $10,000. But my point was that the role is not going to be there for him in a full season context and the different game scripts and everything for him to be able to hit in a way that he's like the wide receiver 1. The role has clearly been there in Miami for Tyreek Hill, that we talked about his ceiling being that high and being in that tier with Jefferson. We know the role could be there for Chase. It hasn't been there for Chase. And the role has clearly been there for Puka Nacua. It was sort of the point I was trying to make with this analogy. Where like this offense and the way that it's structured and the way that it's done things could have worked very, very well for Kupp. But the point I was making about this was CMC has another game this week where I'm like, yeah, I mean, I think you just would prefer to have taken CMC. I mean, it's like a lot of the really top players are playing well, right? But if we could redraft right now, I don't know how I would rank that at the top, but I wouldn't have CMC any lower than I had him before, certainly, right? And I might need to raise him higher. 3 touchdowns on the ground, 1 more in the air. I mean, I guess I thought that they would not need to lean on him as much as they are. 7 receptions for 71 yards plus the 106 rushing yards.
He's not going to have that same workload most of the time. Just like, you're going to have that game in week 1 from A.J. Brown. You're going to have the game from Tyreek Hill that we saw today. We had that very sad week 17 performance from Justin Jefferson last year. But, this again is why I'm not saying, people know that I'm wrong about fantasy football stuff and reality football stuff more or less constantly. But when we think about that trade with him for the 49ers last year, just instantly it seemed like such a huge win because it's so unique what Christian McCaffrey brings to the table. And even when you have those other guys that they have, he's the clear superstar. And you cannot stop them when he's doing the things. And so much of you think through McCaffrey and you're like, okay, it's workload related where he's the only guy who can catch all these passes. He's going to be in a good offense. You're going to score, some touchdowns, which that did happen today. But you think about some of the specific plays today where he was squared off with an NFL defender and made a move that you basically haven't seen since Barry Sanders. And when you have that in a guy who's also maybe one of the best receivers in the NFL, regardless of position, it's just when you think about guys who are just so incredibly unique, I guess I don't even really put Travis Kelce in that conversation, even though what he's been able to do from a pure production perspective is astonishing over the last 3 or 4 years. But what Justin Jefferson does on a weekly basis blows my mind. What Tyreek Hill is able to do because of the 4.2 speed is just... again, there's no way that you can combat that. And then what Christian McCaffrey does, you're talking about players who we think through some of the frustrations, and we kind of started off the show where, there are lots of teams that, have some adjustments or just, need more talent at the coaching part of it as well. But we are getting to watch just some extraordinary athletes every Sunday. And it makes sense to kind of think, you'd love for it to be more than the first, 3 or 4 guys, but yeah, how would you, seeing what he's doing now for them.
Yeah.
And you were willing to go back.
No,
and say, I think we're going to have running backs at the 101, 102 potentially next year in the look ahead rankings. Now it wasn't necessarily McCaffrey, but would you, and you can think about it in terms of redraft or think about it in terms of like your own rosters. When you have him on your team, who is the guy where you feel like, well, this might mean that I could win the $1 million because this player in the context of the rest of the guys I have means that, if I don't get this slate of injuries, I put together the right kind of roster and I could win the whole thing because of this guy.
After today's game, Sean, Christian McCaffrey is up to 30 PPR points per game. Exactly. That's the number that he was at. In the 2019 season, he was at 29.3. And then he was pretty much hurt since then. So like you were just talking, like as you were saying that, I was thinking about, you were talking about how sort of blessed we are to have all these great athletes that we get, these great players that we're watching. Like it is just so cool to have Christian McCaffrey healthy, out there crushing in an offense that is utilizing his strengths in a Kyle Shanahan offense. Like right when that trade was made, the other thing we talked about was how cool it was going to be to see Christian McCaffrey play under Kyle Shanahan. And we've gotten a year of that almost now. And it's been everything that we hoped, right? It's been super fun. But yeah, even when you said that about the trade at the time, I don't know if I even expressed this, but I was a little bit unsure about that. I'm still like a little bit cognizant of the running backs don't matter concerns and this and that, where a lot of that stuff comes from. But as you say that again now, and as things have evolved in the year since, and how we've emphasized with the cover 2 deep shells and all those things, how important explosive running backs have been to these schemes that are starting to really hit now. And the versatility and the different things that he allows you to do schematically, how important motion is. Shawn, there was a great tweet this week that I threw in Stealing Signals from ESPN's Seth Walder of there's just an XY axis chart, motion on rush plays, motion on pass plays. And there's two things that are immediately striking of it. The first is the teams that are motioning at a really high level are the teams that are successful. Miami's at like almost 70% motion on rush plays, over 50% of pass plays. They're way out ahead of everyone. The Rams are almost 70% of rush plays. They're at like 30% of pass plays, also very high up on the chart. The 49ers and Packers also higher, on both on both parts of the scale than most teams. Those are the four coaches from the play caller series we were talking about a lot this offseason. They are doing things a little bit more innovatively. That's not a word. The Lions and the Chargers are the only other teams sort of in that range. They have Kellen Moore and Ben Johnson, two young offensive coordinators who get a lot of credit for being a little bit more forward thinking. So that, and all those offenses are pretty successful, right? They're doing some things. The second thing that jumps out at you immediately, and I before I say the second thing, I was watching my UW Huskies. They're doing a ton of motion. They have a really fun offense. I've been telling you a little bit about this over the last couple of years. We have this Kalen DeBoer took over the offense. Ryan Grubb, our offensive coordinator. It's been so fun as an alum of this school that we finally got a coach in place that does some of the things that we've talked about on Stealing Bananas for years. And I'm like, yeah, I get to root for a team that does fun stuff, misdirection, motion, and all this stuff. And UW is up there. I can't remember how high they are in motion rate, but the stat they showed on the game Saturday night was the top 10 teams in motion rate in college are 36-4 right now. 9 of the 10 teams are averaging 30 plus points per game. That's at the college level, right? The second thing on this pro chart that I just referenced from Seth Walder that stuck out to me is the rest of the league, other than those 6 teams that I just mentioned, are in a huge clump down in the bottom, still not motioning. How we've been talking about this for like 3 years on the show, Shawn. We have seen the results, the misdirection, the motion, all of those things. How are there not more offenses and more teams? And we've talked about the cocoon, as our buddy Evan Silva would call it, and all the coaches that just have the jobs for life that are the same offensive coordinators for such a long time. But it should not still be such a hack in 2023 that like just doing some motion and some misdirection is going to improve the efficiency of your offense. But it is, because so many teams are not doing it. Not because teams aren't doing it, but the defenses don't have the answers for it. At the college level, at the pro level, you need to motion, you need to misdirection, you need to show certain things and then change things. Anyway, McCaffrey was the point that I got off on this tangent about. Allows them to do so much of that stuff pre-snap, post-snap even. They can line them up outside. And with Debo, they can do so much formationally, and they can change. It's impossible to game plan from them. The looks that they've put on film just through 4 weeks, they can do a lot of different things and change up their personnel in a way that, I mean, you could run the exact same play that you've shown on film, but just put Christian McCaffrey in the slot and put Debo at running back. And as long as your offensive players know where they're going and what to do, the defense is probably not going to recognize that as the same thing. Instead, the defense is going to be calling out Christian McCaffrey's in the slot. How are we guarding this? Whose responsibility is that? Debo Samuel's in the backfield. What's our rules on Debo Samuel in the backfield? How are we, is our cornerback following him if he runs out of the backfield and runs a wheel route up the sideline? What are we doing? And all the 49ers have done is just flip some personnel, but it's probably, I have to imagine, for defenses, puts them in tough spots. Anyway, you look 5-10 years down the road, and I was mentioning this motion chart I think you're going to see way more of the teams moving up to where they're motioning more. You're going to see a lot more motion. Sean, when we were talking about ways that we could improve the NFL when it wasn't scoring so well, you commented that we should do like a CFL thing and just allow them to do, motion, get running starts, all that stuff. Because we know that the motion is beneficial. Like, let's just let them run all over the place. But half of these teams, more than half, 3/4 of these teams aren't even doing the legally allowed motion as much as they should be. But I do think in the future we're going to see a lot more of that. For now, it's, it's a little bit of a cheat code still, a little bit of a hack, even though we've been talking about it so long, it feels like old news. It is still a little bit of a hack, and it is something that the Niners are taking advantage of, and they can use McCaffrey so effectively. There was a simple play today. They did the exit motion, which is what they're calling what the Dolphins started doing in week 1, where they're, instead of running the player, motion him all the way across the formation and giving the defense time to adjust as he's moving all the way across the formation, they're lining up a guy in tight or in the slot or something and motioning him out to the same side of the field. And then it's a quick motion, but he gets movement. They did an exit motion with Christian McCaffrey today, and then just ran him back on a short little dig over the middle. He catches it and then is moving laterally and ends up basically crossing the whole field and ends up getting a first down on the other sideline almost. It was like a 12 or 15-yard gain. But it was just like, it was both very easy and also laughably hard because he motioned to one sideline and then ended up running all the way to the other sideline. He traversed like 60 yards to go 12 yards upfield. But it was so easy for them to just scheme him into the motion pre-snap, allowed him to get a free release, and then as he's coming back in, he catches this pass in space, and then he's so dynamic with the ball in his hands in space, and he's moving laterally where defenders are trying to get back, and he's just cutting back behind them and kind of flowing against the grain of what the defense is trying to do. It's just too easy for Christian McCaffrey in that type of situation, similar to Tyreek Hill's running in those types of spots and those types of things. Anyway, McCaffrey, obviously an incredible weapon for the 49ers. And I see it now, even more now in the year since you made that strong case last year when McCaffrey got traded, that he was worth all of that. I mean, what he allows them to do and what you need to do to win in the modern NFL. I mean, he's so exciting in this offense.
So, Ben, for our final note, over or under 30 points per game for Christian McCaffrey on the full season?
I think I have to say under. Under.
Well, that'll do it for today's episode of Stealing Bananas. We appreciate Ben battling through his illness. We appreciate all of the NFL teams and their players for putting up another exciting, complicated, creative, and occasionally disastrous week 4. Love the variety. Love doing the show with you, Ben. That's it for today. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. You can follow him at Yards Per Gretch. Make sure you sign up for Stealing Signals. He'll have a couple of those articles out for you over the next couple of days. Make sure you sign up for Stealing Lines. Make sure you sign up for Stealing Signals Gold. We'd love to have you guys join us over at RotoViz using the coupon code RVRadio2023 at checkout. I mentioned the tools and the Zero RB Universe article a couple times. But especially, I just want to give a big thanks to everybody who's left us a rating and review recently. Those really helps with the algorithm. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.